Hey everyone, welcome to Bookends of Recovery, where recovery gets real and loved ones aren't left out. I'm Laura, and I've lived it. I've used, I've healed, and I've loved someone through it. Today we are going to be talking about betrayal trauma, triggers versus responses, and what your body is trying to tell you. A couple of episodes ago I mentioned about how our body kind of reacts when we see certain things, like the smell of someone's cologne and how that can bring back, either a good memory or a bad memory, or just seeing something like a picture go across the screen. And like for me, there was a time where I saw something on a screen and it would trigger me so hard. And that's not overreacting. That's your nervous system reacting to something it has seen or felt before. So before we dive in too much, let's just, talk about the definition of a trigger. So that is anything internal or external that activates an emotional or physical response that is associated with a past experience, and oftentimes it's tied to something painful or scary or even unresolved. And the thing is, our bodies, they're not so great at telling time. The nervous system's job is to keep us alive. It's not here to keep us calm. And it's definitely not logical with, a perfect perspective on things. It's always, I shouldn't say always, it's scanning for danger. It's not nuanced, so when it senses a familiar threat, even if it's quote unquote just a cabinet door slamming, it doesn't pause to ask, hey, is this like 1998? Or is it 2025? Or it's not stopping and pausing and going, is this disclosure day right now? Or is this, August 28th, 2025? It's not pausing to ask those critical questions. It's simply reacting. And those reactions can come out in all different kinds of ways. It can be snapping at someone who didn't mean you any harm, freezing in place or going numb, fleeing, or just even having that need to feel like you need to flee and get away, having flashbacks of an event, or just, reliving that moment. There's physical effects, nausea, dizziness, headaches, that adrenaline feeling, shutting down emotionally, that feeling of panic, just genuinely feeling unsafe or rejected, and it feels like it pops up out of nowhere. But it's not out of nowhere. It's coming from back then, even if the situation is happening right now. It's been over a decade, and I remember some of my triggers vividly. I recall what triggered them, how my body responded, and how I attempted to calm myself before I created my go bag. Like one time, we were sitting on my couch. Like, we haven't had this couch for at least 8 years, and I remember it. I was sitting on my couch. I saw something on TV. I knew that it would trigger him. Even though he'd been in his recovery for months and months and months, and it was no longer a trigger for him. But because I knew it was a trigger at one time, I remember looking over at him, like side-eyeing him, just to see. And because I did that, it triggered me. And then that trigger escalated just so fast that I was just in this downward spiral. And I had to get up, and I left. And back then, my only, form of self-care was me, myself, and I. And so I went into the bathroom. He had no idea what was going on. So, like, 5 minutes later, he comes in and he's like, "Are you okay? What can I do to help?" And I just looked at him and I was like, "I do not know." And I told him what had triggered me. And he was just like, "I'm so sorry. What do you need me to do?" And he went to go hug me and I said, "Don't touch me." And he was like, "Okay." And he was like, "Should I leave?" And I said, "No." And he was like, "What do you want me to do?" And I said, "I don't know." And he just stood there and waited. And then I calmed down. We went back and watched TV again. But it was just one of those moments where I couldn't explain what I needed him to do or what I needed to do, but I just needed to get away from the TV. And I needed him to be there, but I didn't know what I needed him to do. So he just stood there, and I just looked at him, and I calmed down, and then we both went back and watched TV again. But it's just, that's one of a few that I remember vividly. But it's so important in our journey to remember that not every intense feeling is a trigger. Some things simply are uncomfortable and frustrating or just upsetting in the moment. A trigger is when your nervous system reacts to a current event with the intensity of a past event. So here's a way to tell the difference, because I'm going to give you an example of another thing. So a trigger, it feels sudden, it's out of proportion, it's overwhelming. It brings up old patterns that fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. Okay, I'm going to say that again. Old patterns, fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. If you need that, if you're not familiar with those, just look on my website and just type that in. And then it can include, that body flashbacks or intense dread, and it comes sometimes. For those of you listening that are kind of tuning in to see what it might be like for your partner, we sometimes feel ashamed that we experience that. I don't know why, but we do. Also, if you're in recovery, you may also experience the same kinds of symptoms that we have in betrayal trauma from things that you have gone through in your childhood. So this may benefit you as well, because I also went through this when I was going through my healing process from abuse that happened to me as a child. So when it's just a response and not a trigger, then you'll feel connected to the current moment. There's room for you to pause and choose how to react. So it's not a 0 to 60 moment. You actually can feel the pause. It may feel unpleasant, but it's manageable. Whereas in a trigger, you just feel so out of control. And usually it doesn't result in like that confusion or regret or whatever. It's the response, trigger versus the response. In the response, it just feels like you have more of a grasp of the situation. Where a trigger, it feels so unmanageable and so out of your hands. So if you've ever walked away from an interaction thinking, why did that hit me so effing hard? You were likely triggered. So one time my husband and I were out eating, I don't know, it was maybe, it was within the first year of disclosure. And he had a pretty good solid recovery going. And I was still, not doing great in my own healing and recovery, because I had gone to that, one meeting and didn't like what I heard, so I never went back. And didn't go back for almost a year. And so I was learning all this information online, but not really doing anything about it. So we were sitting there and eating, and I saw a woman walk by, and she was very pretty, and I live in a resort area. And so it was summer, and so she, had on a crop top or whatever. I scanned her, and I thought he did, but we had like that 3 second rule, you know what I'm talking about? And so I was like, I looked to see if he was looking at her, and he looked, but then went right back, and continued on eating, but now I'm angry. And I said, "You just triggered me." And he goes, "What did I do?" I said, "You went over the 3 second rule." And he goes, "What do you mean?" I said, "She walked by and you looked at her." And he goes, I didn't scan her, if that's what you mean. Like, I looked at her because it's a natural human response to look at somebody as they're walking by, but I promise you, I did not scan her. And he goes, I'm not trying to minimize how you feel, but you just seem angry. And he goes, "You don't seem triggered. I've seen you triggered multiple times." And I was so mad because he was right. I knew I wasn't triggered, but I wanted to use it against him because he did glance, but he didn't look. And I was like, damn it, he's right. And so we were definitely learning, and I felt like shit because he was right. So that was different, and we were definitely a couple learning how to navigate being out in the world between, him in recovery and me learning how to navigate trauma. So, our nervous system is not the enemy. It is trying to keep us safe and using the tools that it learned early on. So when we are in danger or distress, your body stored these experiences as evidence, and now when something feels similar, it sends out those alarms. Even if you're not in the same danger anymore, our body got used to being, in that protection mode. So our reactions, they're not unwarranted. How I reacted in the restaurant, it's not unwarranted. I'm scared. I'm afraid it's going to happen again. I'm afraid there's going to be setbacks. I'm afraid that there's going to be online affairs. These are all warranted things. But he was right. I was not triggered. I'm still angry, right? I was still upset that all that stuff happened because of his addiction. So I had to learn between what was a response and what was a trigger. And also I had to learn how to not accuse him of everything I was feeling. Like, I had to learn that there are some things I could navigate on my own. And that was probably a really hard thing to learn too. Because he was willing to listen to me about everything. But I also had to be willing not to blame him for every single thing. Yes, I was feeling what I felt, and my feelings are valid. But he also didn't have to be the brunt of every single thing. Like, I had to start learning how to manage emotions, and at that point, I had no tools, none. And I had to start gathering some tools so I could start to heal. And I delayed that healing for far too long because it was scary, and it was much easier being angry at him than it was learning how to heal, because he had been in a solid recovery for months and months and months, and I was still holding on to anger and resentment. So, some of the tools that we can learn to navigate is, well, one of my favorite is uh, name. Name the then, right? It's simple, uh, but it's not always easy, especially in the heat of the moment. But over time, it gets easier with practice. So when you feel that your body is going into overdrive, just gently ask, what does this remind me of? When have I felt this before? What's the old story my body thinks it's reliving? And this isn't about reliving the trauma. We don't want you to do that. Like, that's not conducive to healing, but rather identifying what your current response might be echoing as, a past wound. So, for example, your partner cancels plans and you feel crushed and abandoned. But when you pause, you realize it reminds you of a time that your dad didn't show up for a school play, and that pain is stored, and now the nervous system is yelling, we're being abandoned again. Or, something like that. But now you want to ground in the now. So once you've named the origin, anchor yourself back to the present. So that was then, this is now. I'm safe right now. I'm with someone who can communicate even if it's hard. This feeling is old, but I choose a new response. Your partner doesn't respond. Here's more for the people who might be listening. Your partner doesn't respond to a text for a few hours, and your stomach drops. You feel the urge to check their search history, their location, or spiral into fear. You start thinking, great, they're at it again, they're lying, and I can't trust them. But when you pause, you realize this reaction is echoing the early days after disclosure, when the silence really did mean something was wrong. But now you remind yourself, this is a different moment. I'm safe now. I have boundaries, support, and choices. This is not the past replaying. Here's another example. You walk into a family gathering, and immediately you feel small. You feel tense and defensive, even though no one has said a word to you. Your aunt makes a passive-aggressive comment about past choices, and your whole body lights up with shame and anger. But when you pause, you realize your reaction isn't just about what she said. It's about years of judgment, disappointment, and not being believed when you said you were trying. So now you breathe and you remind yourself, that was then. This is now. I'm not who I was in active addiction. I've done the work, and I don't have to prove anything. I get to protect my peace today. So I like that exercise because it's, name the then, ground in the now, and it allows you to reflect back a little bit, but also bring you to the present, so you're able to see progress. And I think it's important to remind ourselves of the progress. And so there are also grounding tools for when a trigger hits. One of my favorites is the 5-4-3-2-1. So if you're not familiar with that, it's you just name things to connect yourself to the present, and it's so easy to do. So 5 things you can see, 4 things you can touch, 3 things you can hear, 2 things you can smell, and 1 thing you can taste. And what that does is that can help stop you from going into that spiral when a trigger hits. Something else that can be helpful, we've talked before about holding an ice cube, shifting it from, one hand to another. Um, this helps reset your system by activating the vagus nerve. I hope that's how you pronounce it. And obviously, if you don't have an ice cube handy, you can just like splash your face with cold water. When you see people do that in like TV shows and then movies, that's why. Or even just step outside. Just get that nerve, whether it's hot or cold, activated, because you're just doing a temperature shift. You can also, and I know this sounds a little weird, but trust me, it works. You know how we always talk about doing self-soothing? You always say, like, talk to yourself like you would your loved one, like a good friend or whatever. But you can also talk to yourself like you would a scared child, or I have my big Doberman here, but you can talk to yourself like you would your scared kitten or your scared puppy, and let them know, you're okay. This moment is a safe one, or we don't have to run, we're not in danger, or, it makes sense that we're feeling like this, but we're not there anymore. Just in that reassuring tone, because sometimes when we speak to ourselves that way, it can help calm you down in that moment. And I don't know about you, but after having done everything wrong for almost a year, I was ready to try just about anything, because I had backfired on myself so badly that I was like, I will try it just about anything and everything to heal and not feel the way that I feel right now. So give me some tools. Give me any tools that you think will help me, because what I'm doing right now sucks. Something else you can try is simple movement. And it kind of goes, with, I want to say CBT, and I don't know if that's right. Oh, stupid migraine. But anyway, like when you shake your hands out and you move your whole body, and you can't see me because I'm not on video, but I'm moving my arms and my legs. You just shake it out. Is that Taylor Swift? I don't know. I don't listen to her. But or stretch. Take a walk, or my favorite, dance. But moving helps the body process that excess adrenaline and cortisol that builds up during the trigger. So you want to shake it out. Or is it shake it off? Okay, sorry, I don't know. And then, of course, you want to connect with a safe person. So who is your safe person? Do you have a healing hive or a sober circle? And if not, start creating one. Reach out to your people. They are the people who get it. They know your story. It can even just be a text saying, hey, I just got hammered with a wave and I'm trying to ground right now. I used to leave super long voicemails and then felt better after, and then would just be like, hey, never mind, I'm good. Because sometimes just getting it out was all I really needed to do. One of the most humbling parts of healing is realizing that you don't always see the trigger coming. It just happens. And sometimes you'll be doing fine, and then bam, something totally random takes you out. That doesn't mean you're back at square one. It means your body is showing you something that you may need to take a look at, right? Maybe it's an old wound that needs to be healed, or maybe you just need someone to comfort you, and that's good. That's a good thing. But the more you get curious and not judgmental about your reactions, the more power you have to respond instead of just reacting. And it's okay not to explore certain things. I thought when I first started counseling that I had to explore and go deep into every emotional trauma that I had experienced. And my counselor was like, no, like if you don't want to go down that memory, then you don't have to. You can just be willing to accept that that happened and not reopen that wound. And I was like, cool. I'm going to leave that memory right there and not re-traumatize myself. And so, and remember, like, healing and recovery doesn't mean you never get triggered again. It means you learn to recognize what's happening and give yourself compassion and stay rooted in your truth. You are not your past. You are not your pain. You're not broken, because your nervous system is still reacting to what you've experienced. The more you practice identifying, then versus now, the more space you create for your nervous system to feel safe in the present. Your body is not trying to blow up your day. It's trying to protect you based on what it's learned. You're learning and growing. You're gathering your tools. Please don't go through what I went through. I don't know why I was so stubborn and resistant to picking up tools. I think I was just so scared of letting go of the hurt that, because I thought that if I let go of the hurt and the anger, then I was saying to my husband that I accepted what he did. And by accepting it, then I gave him permission to do it again. But what I wasn't realizing was that I had already done my boundaries, and that my boundaries said that if this happens again, if you have another online affair, I'm out. And so that's what it was. And then if you have a setback and you don't tell me and that becomes a pattern, I'm out. And so I had made my boundaries, but I was so afraid that if I didn't, stay mad, then somehow, then I would lose some sense of control maybe. And so I think that's why I got stuck there for so long. But I just did myself so much harm in the process. So I encourage you to get some tools. You've got perspective and you're writing a new story, and, your reactions don't run the show. Your healing and your recovery are leading the way. So, and when your old wounds show up, just say, look, I see you, I remember, but I'm here now. And if this hits home, I would love to know. You can visit bookendsofrecovery.com. I've got free workbooks on there. I do have workbooks about triggers and tools and ways to connect. And you're also invited to join other bookenders on Reddit at Bookends of Recovery. And I'm also on Facebook at Bookends of Addiction Recovery. Please don't ever forget your strength, your value, your lovability, and what a total superstar you are. I am so grateful that you're here, and I will catch you next time. I am sending you positive vibes. Thank you so much for being here. This is Laura, signing out.